Hi, this is Anna Hackman Green Sisterhood, and I'm here with Karen Lee, my co-host, Karen Wave. And we have a special guest today. We have Maya Van Rossum, and she's with the Delaware River Keeper Network. And actually, she's the Delaware River Keeper, which she's going to explain. We also have Paige looking in. Paige Wolf is also going to be listening in on our conversation. We're going to be talking about fracking today, and what is the dangers of fracking. And Maya, I'm going to put you up on the screen. I'm not going to longer be the picture. Hold on one second. You're up on the screen. Maya, tell us a little bit about fracking. A lot of people really don't know what it is. So give us like the 101 on fracking.
Sure. Well, the important thing to know is that fracking is one element of a whole process called shale gas development, and it's the element with an intriguing name that really has brought a lot of attention to the issue. But when we talk about fracking, we really need to be thinking about the whole process of developing for shale gas. What developing for shale gas means is the gas drilling industry bores down into the earth about a mile, bores out horizontally a mile, maybe two at this point. They take an average of 5 billion gallons of water and they put it in very high pressure down that borehole. To that water, they've added a slurry of chemicals, many of them toxic. The actual recipe is not divulged, so even emergency responders don't know actually what has been added to the water that gets shot down the borehole. The water is in order to actually fracture the shale under the earth to release little bubbles of gas that have been trapped for millions of years in the rock. About 87% of that water they're finding in Pennsylvania remains under the surface of the earth. The rest of it comes back to the surface. The water that comes back to the surface has the toxic chemicals that have been intentionally added by the gas drillers, but it also pulls from the geology other contaminants. Heavy metals and even radioactive materials now get added to this toxic water to even make it even more toxic. That comes back to the surface of the earth, often stored in large pits. Some of that water gets reused, but eventually that water has to be disposed of. The water is so toxic, they don't really have good technologies for disposing of that water. So consequently, the majority of that water gets taken to states like Ohio, where the water gets re-injected into the ground and stored in underground caverns so that it can't be released. Some of this wastewater that has been actually treated at treatment plants and then released into local waterways have caused pollution events. And so, for example, recent research about along the Blacklick Creek out in western Pennsylvania has shown that there's actually radioactive materials now in the sediment of the creek as much as 200 times higher than normal background levels for that creek. So it causes problems when we try to take this toxic waste to a traditional wastewater plant because we don't really have the technology to treat it. The water that remains under the ground, that 87% or so, now very toxic, that has the ability over time to either eke through the existing or created cracks in the earth and eventually get up to our freshwater aquifers and contaminate them. There's a lot of emerging research about that. But also that borehole that was drilled for this fracking process, if the casing at the upper portion of the borehole has flaws in it or develops flaws over time, it can become a pathway for this toxic water to get directly up to the surface of the earth and to the freshwater drinking water aquifers we have at the surface. And we know that those casings do fail and will fail. Research shows that they're failing on the order of 6 to 7% right now. But the cement and the steel that is used for those casings only has a life cycle of 80 to 100 years. So eventually they will fail and become a conduit for this toxic water to get to our freshwater aquifers. The water that has come to the surface, some of it's getting reused, some of it sits around until it gets treated and or disposed of. Well, that often sits in big pits, and those are big pits of danger. If we have an incredible flood event like we have so commonly now, you could have a washout. as that toxic water gets moved around from one fracking drilling site to another, you can have spills, and we have had spills. Sometimes there are intentional discharges because the drillers want to get rid of that water cheaply, and so they might intentionally discharge it to the surface somewhere or even to a creek. There are stories and known events of drillers actually cutting the lining that's in these pits so that the water can slowly eke out over time. So that's sort of a water, we're dealing with a lot of toxic water. And I guess it's sort of hard to say, there is no best case, worst case scenario. We have one scenario where we have this highly toxic water that is so toxic we can't treat it, we can't use it in any way other than for more drilling. Or we have these huge volumes of water that we've injected into the ground, either when it's wastewater or for the fracking process, and therefore is removed from the surface of the earth forever. And so it's removed from the use of present and future generations. And I think we all learned very early in school, we have a very limited supply of fresh water to support our human populations and to support the nature we share this earth with. And if we start toxifying it and injecting it under the ground with the hopes that we will never see it again, then we never see it again. And so it's lost for our use. All of this industrial activity creates a lot of air pollution. You need as much as 4,000 truck trips to service each one of these well sites. You need compressors. You have these big pits of toxic chemicals where the chemicals volatilize off into the air. So you have an incredible volume of air pollution. You have a lot of methane that gets lost during this drilling process. The methane is what makes up this gas, but it doesn't all get captured. A lot of it gets intentionally or unintentionally lost into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change, and methane is very dangerous for climate change. You also have an incredible level of land disturbance, right? Each one of these well pads requires over 3 acres of land for the well pad, and then another 5 to 6 acres of estimated pipelines to get to and from the well pad. You need roads to get in and out of these well pads. In some places we have little local roads that are getting overwhelmed by the trucks servicing these drilling sites. In some cases we have to create the roads for both the pipelines and the well pads. So we have vast volumes of land that are getting lost. Now in the Delaware River watershed, the Marcellus Shale, which is one of the geologies that the drillers attack with this fracking process, covers about a third of the upper reach Delaware River watershed in Pennsylvania and New York. We don't have drilling right now, and we can talk about that later, but just to give people a sense of scale, just in that area, there are estimates that we could have anywhere from 32,000 to 64,000 wells, just really a relatively small portion of Pennsylvania and of New York. 32,000 to 64,000 wells. If you're talking about 5 million gallons of water to frack each one of those wells, you're talking about 160 billion to 320 billion gallons of fresh water that is either being toxified or injected into the ground and lost to the surface of the earth. And then all of the land disturbance that goes with it. There are lots of estimates about how much land has been lost, how much land will be lost. It is estimated that already in Pennsylvania, 33,000 acres of land has been lost to the 6,000 or so well pads that have already been created, wells, or are in the process of being created. One estimate says that we will lose as much as 150,000 acres of our forests to the drilling process and to the pipelines that service them just in the state of Pennsylvania. We're talking just in Pennsylvania, in 2012, 1.2 billion gallons of wastewater, of that toxic, highly toxic wastewater that had to be dealt with. That's just in Pennsylvania. Nationwide, the estimate is 280 billion gallons of that wastewater. So these are huge, huge numbers, which means huge, huge impacts for our communities.
You know, Maya, when you talk about this, my reaction immediately goes to, how did this happen? How did they ever get the right under the EPA to be able to do this? I mean, that just goes against everything, Superfunds, everything that I learned as a lawyer with environmental law, everything. And I'm like, I'm stunned.
Well, the very sad thing is way back in 2005 when we had, what was it, the energy panel that then Vice President Cheney pulled together to talk about energy options and our energy future. Well, in all of the activity that happened around that time and that came out of that, that effort, the gas drilling industry got a number of exemptions from our federal environmental protection laws. And in fact, the gas drilling industry is almost wholly exempt from all of our major environmental protection laws, those that protect our water, protect our air, protect us from hazardous waste. So this has been a long and carefully calculated effort by the gas drilling industry and the politicians that they fund to lay out the framework that would let them get away with this mass devastation and harm to our communities.
And talk about the farmers that or people or landowners that are, selling their rights to their land. I mean, are they being strong-armed? Do they obviously need the money? I mean, what is going on there? Knowing what they know about their neighbors.
Well, I think we have a combination of situations. We have a lot of people who very early on, the landmen came to their homes and said, "Hey, you can get natural gas. It's a clean burning source of fuel. It won't harm the environment. We promise we'll protect everything." And wonderful thing, while you're helping to protect the environment by allowing us to get access to this gas under your land, you can be making buco bucks. So it's a win-win, right? And these people signed. There are some people who were manipulated into signing. There are some landowners who feel that they were strong-armed into signing because the lands around them, the property owners around them had already signed, and so the drilling is happening or will happen, so they're already suffering the devastation of the drilling. So why shouldn't they at least try to get a little bit of the money, because they're already being impacted because their neighbor, is within eye shot, ear shot, nose shot, so they can see it all. So I guess I might as well do it on my property. So there are a lot of reasons why people got engaged. There are many, many people who regret it. There are some people who are getting money from it, many of whom we hear stories about, they're already packed up and moved off somewhere else because they don't want to live in the industrialized zones that they now find themselves. There are a lot of people who are expecting a lot of money who aren't getting it. But there are a whole lot more people whose health is being damaged because of the air pollution, because of the water pollution. They're losing their fresh drinking water supplies. There are farmers who have had impacts to their farm animals, that perhaps a farm animal, either from a stream or from one of these frack pits, got exposed to the water, and they're having problems with reproduction. They're getting sick. Some of them are falling ill. Some of them have died. Organic farmers who are concerned about their organic certification because of what goes up into the air does eventually come down, and it's coming down on their crops, so that's a big concern for them. There are people who did not lease, people who did lease, who their home is everything they have. I mean, if you think about all of us, that's pretty much our biggest investment for the average person in this country and beyond. Well, people who put everything they had into their homes now suddenly find that their homes are of very little value. Nobody wants to buy them. So these are people who find themselves in the industrialized zones of the shale industry. They want to move. They can't sell their home because their home is worth so little at this point. And the bank doesn't want to give anybody a mortgage to buy their home. And the insurance companies don't want to provide title insurance for somebody to buy their home. And you know what? Nobody wants to buy their home because when you go out to their front porch, you smell, you see, you hear shale gas development, and you know what it means for your health and for your family. And so these people are stuck, and kids are getting sick, and families are getting sick. The stories of nosebleeds and skin lesions and scratchiness and dizziness and headaches, and people who are being exposed to cancer-causing substances. And with all of that going on, nobody is doing, certainly not the governments, they're not doing the research to assess the health ramifications of the drilling industry. So we have a lot of people who know they're getting sick and are going to the doctor and they're telling their tale, but there's not any comprehensive survey to pull the numbers together to really let us be able to understand and share with everybody the volume of health implications that are resulting from this shale gas development.
When we were talking before the video, we were talking about how Delaware River, you guys have kept it out of the Delaware River, the fracking. How have you done that, and how can that be a lesson for other communities to say no?
Yeah. Well, I have to say I'm very pleased and proud to be able to say that one of the primary reasons why we have a moratorium on shale gas development in the 4 states of the Delaware River watershed is because of something my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, did 20 years ago before anybody was talking about shale gas. The quality of our upper Delaware River was so high and so pristine that we filed under the Clean Water Act for a special designation called Outstanding National Resource Waters. And we filed this petition for this designation with a regulatory body called the Delaware River Basin Commission, which the commission is made up of the governors of the 4 states that are in the watershed, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and then a representative for the president, who right now is an Army Corps of Engineers colonel. Anyway, we filed this legal petition. We engaged in years of advocacy, pulled together lots of science, but in the end, we got our version of Outstanding National Resource Waters, which was Special Protection Waters. And the goal of the Special Protection Waters designation and all of its elements charged with achieving this goal is that you have to protect the existing water quality of the Delaware River. And that is the water quality of the river at the time the designation in the early 90s was passed. We got the majority of the upper portion of the watershed designated in the mid-90s, and that would be from the Delaware Water Gap up for those who know the area. Then in the year 2000, there was a turn of events that allowed us to submit this same legal petition for another portion of the Delaware River, which went from the Delaware Water Gap down to Trenton. Covers 197 miles of the river in total, and we did our advocacy and everything, and we got the Special Protection Waters designation applied to that stretch of river. So total 197 miles has this highest level of legal protection anywhere in the country. Fast forward, shale gas comes to town. We immediately go to the DRBC, the Delaware River Basin Commission, and say you cannot protect the existing water quality of the Delaware River and have shale gas development. You simply can't do it. And so the commission put in place a moratorium on shale gas development until such time as they pass regulations that would allow shale gas development to happen and water quality to be protected. And ever since that moratorium went in place 3 years ago in 2010, we have battled and battled and battled hard to keep the vote from happening that would pass the regulations that would lift that moratorium. Now, the way the DRBC operates, that vote could be scheduled and could happen very, very quickly. So we are protected now. The entire Delaware River watershed is protected now. But that protection, if we don't remain vigilant and firm and strong and successful, could be lifted with one vote in one morning, one afternoon. So we fight very hard against it. But I think the important thing, too, to understand is we are not sitting here in the boundaries of the Delaware River watershed saying, woohoo, we're protected from shale gas development. We don't care about anybody else. We are very connected to the other communities across Pennsylvania and across the nation that are suffering from shale gas development. And we are working with them very hard to make the case that they deserve the same level of protection that we have, which is no drilling and no fracking. We believe that by proving that shale gas development is not safe for our river and our communities and our watershed, we are also making the case and proving that it is not safe for any river or any watershed or any community. And we are working hard with those other communities to help them make that case within the boundaries of their watershed, their town, their county, their state.
When I was sitting...
I have 2 questions.
Go ahead, Karen.
The Delaware that you're talking about, the 190 miles you said, that this is the river that starts up in Catskills, New York?
That's correct. The entire main stem river is 330 miles.
Okay.
The portion that has this special designation
Mm-hmm.
is 197 miles of that 330 miles. So from the headwaters, all the way up in the Catskills, down to, well, the main stem begins in Hancock, New York, down to the portion of the river where you have Trenton, New Jersey on one side and Morrisville, Pennsylvania on the other.
Okay. Because I pass by Hancock all the time, so I understand how pristine it is, and it would be a shame to have the whole area affected by something awful as fracking. And my second question is, so, I'm playing devil's advocate. We need energy. We don't want oil drilling. We don't want, coal. And so they're saying clean gas, and gas is the way to go. We have all this energy that's buried in our, in the rocks underneath Earth. Why can't we get it out if we can find a safe way of doing it? This is going to be the argument from the other side. But my argument is, how long does the gas last? I mean, in other words, how many years is this fracking? Let's say you drill one area. How much gas are we talking about? Are we talking about gas for eternity? Are we talking about gas for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? We do all this damage, and what are we actually getting out of it? You know what I'm trying to say? I heard anywhere from 3 to 5 years of gas. So is that enough to damage livelihood and environment just for 5 years worth of gas? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the answer is no. Whether 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, even if we were talking about the 100 years that that the politicians who love the gas drillers attempt to quote, it would not be enough to be worth sacrificing our water, our air, and future generations that are going to have to suffer from the climate change that will result. It's simply not enough. But it is an important question. In terms of shale gas development overall, we do hear different figures about how long will the gas last, and we have heard, the politicians that fancy the money that they're getting from the drilling industry talk about 100 years. We've even heard the president be foolish enough to quote that figure. But the fact of the matter is the figure is far lower. We are talking about maybe we're talking about decades, and we may be talking about as few as a decade when all is said and done. But this gas is going to be coming out over time, right? They're going to be going in and drilling the wells over time, year after year. So they could be claiming that they're getting gas for a very long period of time, depending upon, how slowly they decide to do the drilling. But the volume of gas is not going to make this country energy independent. That's is a false point. Right. Promise, right? It's a false claim, and it's a false promise. One, there's not enough gas to do that in terms of periods of time, right? So we're talking about decades. We're not talking about forever. There's not enough gas coming out of the ground to do that in a given year. I mean, we use other forms of fuel and energy. We still use coal. We still use oil. We are not transforming into a total natural gas country, and there wouldn't be enough gas to do that, number two. But I think very, very important for people to understand, the shale gas industry, who touts this energy independence, get us free from foreign sources of fossil fuels, they are not looking to make this country energy independent. They are looking to make the biggest profits they possibly can. And one of their biggest pushes right now is to get approvals to allow them increasingly to capture this gas, regardless of the devastation on our communities, and to liquefy it and send it as liquefied natural gas to other countries who will buy it. And the reason is because they can sell it for 4 times the price overseas than they can sell it here.
Yeah, that was actually my question next, because I had heard that too. So what can we do? I mean, it doesn't sound like there's no win-win in this at all. There's just none. So what can we do?
Yeah. So the very important is to recognize that There is no half measure that makes shale gas development okay. The level of devastation is so far-reaching and so deep and hits every aspect of our lives that you can't fix. For example, the industry talks about green fracking fluids rather than all of the, the toxic chemicals. Well, even if you could accomplish that, which they haven't, and it doesn't look like they're doing, you wouldn't be able to prevent the land devastation and the radioactive materials and toxins that come out of the geology and toxify the water and the air contamination. Fixing one element of this devastating process does not fix the industrial process that is shale gas development. So we need to recognize that, which means that the only answer is no. We should not have shale gas development. It is not worth sacrificing our air, our water, and future generations that are going to have to deal with the climate change impacts. And the other important part of the message, though, is saying no to shale gas doesn't mean that we're going to sit suffering, freezing, and cold in the dark somewhere. The choice is not shale gas or no energy, no lights, no heat. We have sustainable energy options, solar panels, appropriately sited wind farms, geothermal, and there are amazing technologies that one reads about every day for how to create energy in truly sustainable ways. So what we need to do in this country, not invest in shale gas. We need to get our politicians to understand that our better energy option is truly sustainable energy. It's better for the environment, it's better for jobs, it's better for the economy, and we're not going to be sacrificing our communities now and in the future to get it.
And how do we do this? I mean, there's such a fight, there's such a divide on this. I mean, I even attended a seminar on energy. It was sponsored by the bar in New Jersey, and they're all talking about how gas is the answer, natural gas. And I'm sitting there with my mouth wide open saying, are you serious? So I raised my hand and I said, what about fracking? And they said, well, it's not our problem. We don't have any oil here in New Jersey. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's just such a ugh. So what do we do? I mean, I go back to the same thing. We can all stand by and, fight all the petitions. And at the end of the day, it takes our politicians to change this. How do we get that to happen? We can't even get them to agree right now in Congress.
Well, one important thing to get change is to make those politicians and all the communities that vote them into office to understand that they are not safe from shale gas development. First off, to say that New Jersey is safe from shale gas development because they don't have the Marcellus Shale isn't true. They've got the Utica Shale, and they have other shales, and new shales are being discovered all over the place in this country where it's being asserted that shale gas is harbored that are being targeted by the drillers. So it used to be that people were only talking about the Marcellus. Now they're talking about the Marcellus and the Utica, and there is Utica Shale under New Jersey, and there's also the South Newark Basin. That is a shale under New Jersey that cuts across under Bucks County in Pennsylvania where there is no Marcellus, but there's this other shale. So we need communities to understand that just because right now they are not exposed to this devastation does not mean they are safe, number one. Number two, shale gas development happening out in western Pennsylvania requires a lot of infrastructure. How do you get that gas from western Pennsylvania to the LNG facilities that they want to build on the Delaware River or on other rivers across the country in order to ship it overseas, or to other communities or other industries in New York or elsewhere? How do they do it? They do it with pipelines. Big, massive pipelines that are cutting through our residential communities, through our agricultural lands, through our pristine forests, through our creeks. When a pipeline goes through a creek, generally, they use something called the open cut. And the open cut is as devastating as it sounds. It is a cut across the creek, which does incredible damage. It is a cut through the forest. These swaths of land where you have this permanent cut are as wide as 100 feet. That creates impacts not just in the 100 feet, but if you're going through forests, it has impacts another several hundred feet back into the forest that impacts habitat and water quality and runoff. So just because you don't have shale gas development doesn't mean you're not going to have the infrastructure necessary. All those pipelines, every 50 miles requires a big compressor to move that gas. In Philadelphia right now, they're talking about more new different industries that are going to use this gas, move this gas, service this industry in a variety of ways, which is going to bring its own level of harm. In Delaware, New Jersey, and the Philadelphia area, all three down in the lower parts of the Delaware River, they've talked about LNG facilities. So just because you don't have the Marcellus Shale, even if you didn't have a shale, it doesn't mean that you're safe from shale gas development. And the air impacts and the water impacts hits everybody, downwind, downstream, and the global climate changing impacts, that's going to hit us all. And people are already feeling the effects of climate change in this nation. We need to be finding a way to reverse it, not finding a way to get access to more fossil fuels to make it worse. The way you stop it is you do have to make sure that those politicians understand if they're going to accept the money from the drillers and side with the drillers and continue to sell out our communities, they will not stay in office. In the Delaware River watershed, there was a vote scheduled in 2011 to lift that moratorium that I talked about, to pass those regulations that would lift the moratorium. In the time leading up to that vote, they got the most letters that commission has ever received in its history. I think it was something like 77,000 letters over a period of months. And we had a mass of people turn out on the day that this vote was to be scheduled. And just before the day of the vote, the governors, two of the governors, and as we understand it, well, one of the governors and the representative from the president, as we understand it, were so fearful of being the deciding vote in one direction or the other that they canceled the meeting. And that's why that vote didn't happen and the moratorium is in place. It's because people lifted up their voices together, made themselves heard, and were willing not just to write letters and to make phone calls and to cast the right vote, but when the moment came that the harm could come to their doorstep, they turned out in droves to send a message to those politicians, and the politicians heard.
So is there something on your website that lets people know what's going on in their communities and what they should be aware of? Because I think a lot of it is lack of knowledge. Like people don't want this, but they don't know what to do, like sign petitions or get out and canvass. And is there some like central location on fracking that someone could go and say, oh, what's going on in my community so I stay aware?
Yeah, well, certainly for the Delaware River watershed, if you go to www.delawareriverkeeper.org, we have an e-activist list and we have action alerts that will alert you when there's an opportunity to speak up and help us give voice to the river and defend against fracking and shale gas development. It will also tell you when there are other opportunities in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, even Delaware, whether it's with a pipeline, the associated infrastructure, or something happening elsewhere in those states that have statewide implications and so therefore would impact our watershed. Let you know about those and how you can get involved. So it is a great way to keep informed. And another thing that we have on there that I just want to alert people about, it's something called the Pledge to Protect the Delaware River. And you can get access to it through our website. We've done it in partnership with other organizations, and people can actually sign a pledge to say that not only do they not want shale gas development and its infrastructure, but they are willing to stand up with their bodies against it. Now, that doesn't mean standing in front of necessarily standing in front of the bulldozer, but it does mean, for example, on a day when there's going to be that vote, that they are willing to come out and stand together with their friends and neighbors and with others to say no. For some, it may mean that they're willing to stand in front of the bulldozer. It's going to mean something different for all of us. But the fact that we have thousands of people signing that pledge is sending a very important message to the politicians, that people aren't just wanting to write letters and make phone calls, which is a very important thing to do, but that people care so deeply about this that they are going to come out and turn out in droves when the moment calls for it to stand against shale gas development.
So there's not one central national association, so you just really have to Google who's dealing with fracking in your area?
Yeah, you really do. So that you do. And that's important, because if you had one centralized sort of entity, then that would really mean you have one voice. But the power of our defense against shale gas and fracking is that we have so many voices, so many organizations, so many people in so many walks of life that are getting involved in so many different ways. Our moratorium needs to stay in place to protect us. But if you're across the nation in Wyoming where shale gas development is happening, then you need to take advantage of another opportunity and rise up in a different way. And the way you're going to learn about that is finding your local organization that will tell you how to do that. Again, it's a good thing. Multiple voices, many voices, is actually the strength of this movement. If it all solidified under one, I think that we would lose our power, and people would lose the individual strength they have to bring to the defense against fracking and shale gas.
But even if there is no one central location where people can go and voice their opinions and send letters, but let's say somebody from Colorado or Utah or any other states go to your website, find out what's going on, and let's say participate, and you succeed in what you're trying to do, it just shows the strength in numbers, and also maybe it can trickle down to other states as well and have other states learn how you did it. And just like what we're trying to do with Washington State with GMO labeling. If it was just up to the Washington State residents, it's just Washington State residents. But the rest of the country, if we help them, then that will trickle down to the other states as well. So I'm sure they're watching your successes and learning from what works in your organization that affects our, I'm from New York, Anna's from New Jersey. I drive by, Delaware River all the time. So it makes sense to me that what happens upstate New York, affects me down here, even though I don't live near the river. It affects, my drinking water, and it affects the state in general. Even if I'm not, let's say, eco blogger or green blogger, it affects me down the road. It affects my children. It affects, in that way. So other states will probably benefit from going onto your website and learning how you're doing and learning how to do it correctly.
And they can get a lot of information about the
information itself.
Right. And the other thing is, I think something that is very helpful is, as I said, that Delaware River Basin Commission. The 5 votes on the commission are the 4 governors and that representative for the president. And the longer we keep that moratorium in place, again, it is important to say, hey, President Obama, you're willing to protect the Delaware River. How about protecting our community too? And in fact, the Army Corps has taken a position very recently against shale gas development and fracking in the upper reaches of the watershed that feeds D.C., the president, his water supply. So I'm sitting here today, actually I was earlier today, saying, hey, Army Corps of Engineers, you're willing to take a stance, a strong stance, to protect the president's water. You better be sure you take that same strong stance to protect the drinking water of New York City, Philadelphia, and every other community, above, across, and below.
Sure.
Right. Absolutely. Maya, this has been fascinating. I mean,
so educational.
Really, I mean,
we all know it's bad, but we didn't know the whole history. Yeah.
You really painted a story that's going to make. I hope that people watch this video and they see how they do need to get involved. It's no longer the time to sit back and let other people make our decisions. And Maya, you've done an amazing job in Delaware. I can't imagine how you feel every day, like wondering if that vote's going to happen. You're not even gray. I'd be gray.
I got gray hairs in there, and we do. Every day we're on pins and needles, and we're doing research. And at the same time, we're fighting to protect from fracking and shale gas development. Sadly, we got a whole host of other threats that we have to deal with as well.
This was fascinating. So what we're going to do, everybody, is we're going to put the link down below of Maya's site and any action points that she talked about. We'll have this over on Green Sisterhood. It'll be replayed on Green Sisterhood if you miss it. It's on our YouTube channel. It will be on Green Sisterhood. So everybody go over and sign up. Even if, like Karen said, even if you're not from that area, it's a great place to learn. And taking that information home and putting it into your community and where it belongs. So Maya, it was been a pleasure. And quick shout out to Paige. Thank you, Paige, for introducing us to Maya, because this has been incredibly educational. Next week is Sustainable Joe's, and it's actually two guys who've actually taken it to heart, kind of like No Impact Man, but in Canada. And he's going to come and talk to us about all the sustainability that he's learned in his own home and how he's teaching the community. It should be a lot of fun. So Maya, thank you so much for coming on, and everybody will see you next Tuesday at 2 o'clock.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.